Welcome to the 46th episode of the GameFor Podcast. In this episode, still recording from home, we'll talk about brand loyalty in tabletop gaming. I'm Adam.
And I'm Matt.
And this is the GameFor Podcast. GameFor is a platform to help connect tabletop gamers and to help you get more out of your tabletop gaming. Matt and I are part of a software development and design company called MilkCan. And because most of the folks at MilkCan love tabletop games, we developed the GameFor app and launched it in early 2018. We launched this companion podcast in June of 2019 to help tabletop gamers get more enjoyment out of their hobby. Due to the COVID-19 global pandemic, we hibernated the GameFor app in July of 2020 and plan to bring back a retooled version of the app for Android, iOS, and the web when gaming in person is safer. Until then, we'll keep bringing you this podcast to help you get more out of your tabletop gaming. And speaking of tabletop gaming, and what kind of stuff have you been doing lately?
I have not done a lot of direct tabletop gaming stuff. I have been getting my new printer dialed in. Feeling pretty solid about that now. I'm shocked at
the new resin printer.
Yeah, the new resin printer, the Elegoo Saturn. Yeah, it's coming off really nice prints. I got my new magnetic plate that I build everything off of, which is so nice. I had it for my Mars Pro, and it takes about 2 or 3 weeks for the company to send the new one, and I couldn't order it ahead of time because apparently there's 3 size versions going around for the Saturn, depending on which model. So they recommend you wait till you get it and you can actually measure. So I waited, and then I had to wait another 2 or 3 weeks to get that. But I got that on and installed. So, but yeah, it helps you so I don't have to take the whole piece that drops everything in the resin off. I can just kind of pull the magnetic build plate off, and then I can wash it and clean it all up and stuff. I can flex it a little bit to take stuff off easier and
to pop it off the surface, so you're not having to take the spatula thing and kind of get underneath the edge.
Yeah, I'll still use it from time to time, but it's a lot easier to do that rather than have the big piece of metal, especially now this one, how big it is, and then because it's got the big attachment and all that, so you can throw off your leveling if you're really goofing around with it. So yeah.
Nice.
But yeah, I got that all dialed in, and then my Ender FLM, the Ender 3 Pro, is now down. I was having just beautiful print and was just printing tons of stuff. Everything was going great, and then it just all of a sudden started not working well. And I thought maybe it was one thing, and now I think it might be another belt issue. I'm not sure. It's one of those things I've got to kind of tear down, and I'll have to re-level after I do it. And it's a lot of sunk time that I haven't found time to put in yet. But
sure,
that one's is constantly chasing. It'll work great, and then I'll do something, and I'll just completely goof it up. So
I feel like the filament printers, because there's so many more moving parts, they have a tendency sometimes to be a little bit more squirrely.
Yeah, absolutely, and because of the amount of dialing in to get everything just right, and it's definitely not as plug and play as the resin. But oh well. But yeah, I did that, and then I've been kind of staying away from the basement and the garage stuff because it's been super cold. I think just about everywhere.
But here in the upper Midwest, we've been there was a good week where it barely got above 0 the entire time, I think.
Right. Yeah. And so I've kind of stayed away from stuff, but I finally this last weekend it was warm enough I could turn on the heater in the garage just a little bit, and I did get some woodworking done to kind of finish off a project downstairs. But hopefully once I get that done, then I can get back to painting and assembly. So.
And maybe some, online RPG stuff or something like that. Something scheduled eventually. Yeah. Nice.
So, how about you?
Well, let's see here. So, I started working on the Terrorgeist, who is he's kind of a dragon zombie bat doggo is what we've been calling him on the live stream. He's he's got a definite bat face, but if he's a bat, he's like a bat dragon, but he's huge, but he's also skeletal at this point and kind of a zombie. I don't know. Right. He's an interesting fella, and so I've been working on him to paint, and it's been a little troublesome just because I put him all together and now I'm painting him. Very frequently, well, not very frequently. Sometimes it is easier to paint a piece, a model in parts, because you can get at things a little bit easier and stuff like that. And I did not do that with this guy. I bought him on eBay, and he was already pre-built, and then it looked like he'd maybe been dropped or something. I don't know. He was in sort of parts, but not as many parts as I would have liked. And so I put them together, and then after that I was like, what if that's going to be a problem to paint? And then years went by, like literally probably 2 years. And then now all of a sudden, just recently I decided to start painting him. And now I'm like, oh yeah, this is really hard, because like it's hard to get at like certain spots, because he's he's on the base. He's got his big wings on and all this stuff. So, but I don't know. It's coming out okay. Again, I'm just trying to make him something tabletop playable. But it's been fun. So I worked on him this past last night, and I worked on him the previous.
Do you have like an idea of like where does he fit into your tabletop gaming?
He's going to go into Warcry. He will be a monster for the what is it called? Grand Alliance of Death. So there's the four main Grand Alliances in Age of Sigmar and in Warcry. You've got Order, you've got Chaos, you've got Destruction, and you've got Death. So he's basically like an undead guy. So he hangs out with skeletons and zombies and, all those different types of factions and stuff like that. He's, but he's a monster. So he's a piece that you play against if you're playing like a narrative campaign and you want to have a fight against a monster and stuff like that. So he's not necessarily somebody who's in your group, because he would probably be too powerful. You can kind of bring him into your group, sort of. It's a little convoluted, but he is definitely going to be something that we go up against in Warcry in narrative campaigns. So yeah, and it's he's just a super cool model as well. But I definitely want to use him for for playing. Originally, my plan was he was going to be part of a death army, and he still technically could be if I decided to start playing Age of Sigmar again. But I've been kind of staying away from like army style games just because they have so many models to paint generally. But if I do decide to change my mind, I'll have him available and ready to go and finished. So that's cool too. Yeah. And he's also very pointy. I noticed in last night's episode that I had busted off a small piece and I had to re-glue it on at the beginning of the show, because I like picked him up and I'm like looking him over. I'm like, what happened up here? And then I had to look around on my desk to try to find the part, and luckily I did. And then went from there. Otherwise, you were talking about your 3D printer before, and I had you print me some demon models that I found, some STLs that I found online. From my mini factory, and they turned out really nicely. So recently I just kind of sanded them up a little bit here and there, just fixed a couple little kind of bumps and things like that. And then I glued them to bases, and then I textured the bases, and now I have primed them. So hopefully I'll be able to start painting them maybe even this week, but probably more likely this weekend. Nice. But yeah, I'm working on those they're not for Warcry, they're for kind of a separate project I'm working on. So yeah, that'll be fun. And then also, so I made a video recently about these new books that came out for Warcry, which are for the four different Grand Alliances, and each book has got has information about like new stats and new models you can bring into the game and all this kind of stuff. And so as going through that, I did a video about the books, and then recently I did a video. The most recent video I did, or two recent videos, I don't know. Anyway, was about just Chaos and their book, and then I'll do one a little bit later on about just Order and their book, and then Death and Destruction might end up being at their own video together because they're both a lot skinnier books. But I went through on each of those and sat down and said, okay, this is of the sub factions within these factions, this is the cheapest you can get away with starting an army. Like if you want to do these guys, you can buy this box, and that'll at least build you a legal army, and you could start, warband, you could start playing. And in doing that, I was looking at the Skaven a lot, which are the rat people. And I just really kind of like them. And so I went to my local shop, and they had, it's the cheapest one of all of the different choices for Chaos, and it's a box of 20 clan rats for normally $38. But for whatever reason, my local shop, it was $35. So I bought it. And so, yeah, I'm starting to build some of those for Warcry. And I have some other Skaven stuff that I already owned that was already built. And even some of it's even got their bases textured. And so I can also start putting that together. And so I already have one Skaven warband of just all those plague monks.
Right.
Those kind of green robed guys that I did on Twitch. And now I'm starting just other warbands because they're just fun. I just like having a lot of stuff like that. You know, they're not huge. Like the max you can have in any given roster, I think, is 20. So, you know, you're not talking about a big group of people or rat people or whatever.
Right.
But yeah, I've been a little stuck on Warcry lately. I've been really enjoying it. But the new Kill Team expansion, which is called Pariah Nexus, should be coming out. I think it might be going on pre-order, maybe even this weekend. So it should be coming out soon, and hopefully we'll be able to find out more about it real soon. So that'll be not an addition. Again, and it's an expansion kind of, but it's not like a new edition of Kill Team. Although there may still be one in 2021, a new edition of Kill Team, but we don't know yet. But this is more of it's a little bit more of a flatter kind of board gamey kind of game, which I frankly am not crazy.
Like arena or whatever that they did.
Yeah, a little bit like that, which I'm not super jazzed about. I prefer my games to be a lot more three-dimensional, but it is going to actually have some Necron models in there that are new, and that'll be the only place to get them for at least a while. And they're the flayed ones, which I built my own flayed ones from scratch a while back because it'd been a long time since they'd updated the models, and so I dug it. So I don't know. We'll see. Hopefully, I'll actually be getting a copy from Games Workshop soon. So we'll see and kind of take a look at that. But yeah, that's kind of what I've been doing.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, you're right about the weather. It is starting to get a little bit nicer. I was outside a little while ago, and it's a good deal above freezing finally.
Today. Yeah,
it's sunny. I mean, everything's leaky now because all the snow is melting and everything.
Right. So there's puddles everywhere, but hey, I'm okay with that. And I found that my motivation's starting to return.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The basement for me has been problematic as well because it gets real. Like when it was really, really cold, the basement just doesn't really warm up. Like it hovers between. I have a little thermometer thing, one of those little desks, thermometers.
Oh yeah.
And it hovers between like 57 and 59, basically down there. Yeah, which is, and we don't keep the upstairs real warm. We usually set the thermostat for like 67 or something like that.
Yeah. So, but still, that's like a 10-degree. Yeah, that gets you. That will chill you after being down there for a little while.
Yeah, like if I'm sitting down there on my computer, like I've got like an Afghan over my lap and I've got like a hat on and stuff like that. And when I'm doing my Twitch live streams, I can't really do the Afghan thing or whatever, but I'm still generally wearing a hat lately. But even then, after 3 hours, I come upstairs and I'm chilled, and it takes me a while to get warm back up again. So, but yeah, so now that it's starting to get a little bit warmer, that's going to be, I think, a bit better. And it's one of those situations too, where it's like in the summer, it's lovely down there because it's usually quite, it's a bit cooler,
right?
And so that's quite nice. But the winter is troublesome down there. But I just put on extra clothes and it's generally okay. So the topic of today's podcast is about brand loyalty.
Yeah. So what is that? What do you think of when you say brand loyalty?
Well, I mean, you hear things like, Coke versus Pepsi and Ford versus Chevy and all that kind of stuff and whatnot. But I looked it up on Wikipedia because I'm very fancy. Brand loyalty is the positive feelings towards a brand and dedication to purchase the same product or service repeatedly, regardless of deficiencies, a competitor's actions, or changes in the environment. It can also be demonstrated with other behaviors, such as positive word-of-mouth advocacy. Now, have you ever run into anything like that before in tabletop gaming?
Absolutely.
Yes. Same here.
Never, ever. No, absolutely. Yeah. A lot.
In tabletop gaming, I find personally, and this is partially my own bias in that I mainly am into miniatures wargaming, but I find it to be very prevalent in miniatures wargaming. But I think it's also pretty prevalent in board gaming as well.
Yeah, definitely in board gaming. And brands, not even specifically like brands being companies, especially since like Asmodee owns everybody right now. But
yeah, that's true.
It could be like designers and stuff like that, or titles.
And honestly, like I don't have a problem with like if you love Carcassonne and you just keep buying Carcassonne, you know what I mean? Like because you enjoy it, that's there's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion.
Right.
And even like with like authors, and getting outside of tabletop gaming, I really love this particular author, and so I check out everything that they. But the idea very frequently with brand loyalty is to then be like, but you won't do something else, or you think everything else is bad.
Right.
That's kind of the whole part of the
argument, like
dedication to purchase the same product or repeat, or, that kind of thing.
Absolutely, yeah. Because like you said, reading, like I read Stephen King books and Michael Connelly books, and I don't think that they're they're not like groundbreaking literature that should be taught in all of our universities, but they're good casual reads that I enjoy doing. But I'm okay to criticize them. There's some of them, a couple every once in a while they'll have one I didn't really care for.
Sure.
So yeah, it's different than where I'm not going out and going, I'm only buying this art, this author.
Exactly.
Like all other authors can't.
You're not gonna be like Isaac Asimov. That guy's a total, he's not as good as Stephen King or whatever. I mean, it's right.
Well, and there's also like the opposite of like brand loyalty, where there's like there's a certain brand, like I don't care if it's the best game in the world, if it's made by Fantasy Flight, because I didn't like they did something, I am never buying anything of theirs. The game can't be actually any good.
True. I mean, there are certainly people that will, and it depends on the reasoning. Sometimes, I think that the brand loyalty, I think, is sometimes a bigger issue than I don't like what this company did, so I'm not gonna. So it's called voting with your wallet to some degree. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. If there's something where you're like, especially if it's like a moral or ethics issue, absolutely go for that. I applaud you. But if you're like, oh, I don't like it because it's popular or something like that, or Billy likes Fantasy Flights and I don't like Billy, so I'm not going to buy any Fantasy Flight stuff, then that's just going to hurt yourself.
Exactly. Yeah. So, like, kind of talking about like causes, of brand loyalty. I think very frequently looking at the concept of what causes it to some degree. A lot of it is something that I kind of just refer to as choice confirmation. I did a video about this years and years ago about why people don't like other people's choices sometimes. And this was kind of a little bit about brand loyalty and things like that within wargaming. But choice confirmation is basically the concept of like, hey, I made this choice. I bought this thing. I got into this particular ecosystem. I got into this whatever. And then if I decide to change my mind, then I was initially wrong if I changed my mind, is the thought process. You know what I mean? And, I got into Magic the Gathering, and now I've decided, actually I would prefer to play, I don't know, Force of Will or Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm still sticking within my wheelhouse of a collectible card game.
Right.
But I've decided now that I'm going to do this other thing, and now I feel as if I wasted my time and potentially and certainly money to some degree. And so therefore I don't want to change my mind because I don't want, you know what I mean? Like that's the choice confirmation, where if you find that you're changing your mind, it's a bit of a sunk cost fallacy. You hear about those a lot. And I think there's some of that in gaming, is that you're like, well, I'm already in here,
Right. It's like, like I've got an Apple iPhone right now. Do I want another Apple iPhone? I don't know, but all my stuff is now Apple. All my chargers, all my, my watch, so now is it really worth my time? Even if I think that the new Samsung is a better product.
Yeah.
I'm going to be like, well, but I've already spent all this money on this other stuff.
And the thing that makes it interesting with tabletop gaming is that honestly, none of that stuff is a huge consideration. Like, it makes total sense
No,
with
yeah.
like, you get into like an ecosystem in a technology sphere, like something like you said, like Apple versus, Android. Then yeah, you bought all these apps on the Apple App Store, and you have all these chargers, and you have all this other
Right.
stuff, and that stuff doesn't work with changing. Now, I have changed, and I think you've changed. Were you ever an Android person at all?
Yeah, I went.
Okay.
I've gone back and forth like a couple times now.
Yeah,
It's
and
been a
I
while.
had I mean, like, my first smartphone was neither, actually. It was a Palm Pre, which was weird, but I
had
enjoyed that phone.
I had the BlackBerry one that was supposed to be like an iPhone type clone.
Oh yeah.
And it did like the clicking when like you pushed in, like the screen actually had some tactile like
Yeah.
clicking.
I remember that. Yeah.
Had no apps for it, but
Yeah. But so, when I left the Palm Pre, I went into Android, and then after a while, I switched over to Apple. And I mean, sometimes you rip off the Band-Aid, and but the thing is with tabletop, it doesn't. There's no like chargers. There's no, you know what I mean? Like,
No.
there's not all this extra stuff. If you decided I like this, and now I'm going to, like, here's like just as an example, if you're really into, let's say, tabletop gaming, tabletop miniatures from Games Workshop, you've got a lot of their paints, you got all kinds of that stuff. It's going to be a situation of that. If you decide to switch over to a different brand of paint or a different brand of brushes or even a different brand of game, those paints still work. You can put Citadel paints onto Star Wars minis from Star Wars Legion. You can do it. I've done it.
It says in the manual you're not allowed to.
No, it does not, as it turns out. And that's kind of the thing, is that's part of it, is that I think that the brand loyalty concept of it. Like, I talk to people all the time that ask me, like, on Twitch and things like that. They're like, well, what's the brand of paint you use? And I'm like, well, I use a lot of different brands. I have preferences, but like, I use this brand mainly for these colors, and I use this brand for metallics, and I use this brand for something else. And for this type of thing, I use a combination of sometimes this and sometimes that. And it's you're limiting yourself if you decide to just do one brand, specifically in paint or those things. Like, there's nothing wrong with having a preference, but it's rare that a person only prefers just one brand and never touches anything else. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
At least
like for
paint.
RPGs, for a while, I was like D&D 5th edition. That's just what it is. And like Pathfinder, I'm like, that almost seemed like the Pepsi versus Coke. Like, it was like, you're either a Pathfinder person, you're a D&D person.
No, that's true.
But then I, when 2.0 came out, I was able to get in on the Humble Bundle to get like a very good price on the stuff. And I was, now so I've been reading the 2.0 core book and all that stuff. And the like, some of the stuff I'm like, oh, okay, that works a little bit different. I don't know if I like that better or worse, but there's some stuff I'm like, oh, I really like how they did this. It's a lot better. And I'm
to some degree with that type of thing, though, that becomes a bit of a charger type issue, right? Meaning that, like, you might have, I've got all these extra source books that are designed to work with Pathfinder, and if I decide to switch over to D&D 5th edition, for example, all these source books won't necessarily transfer, or they will, but it'll be a bunch more work on my part to make that happen.
And it will be some work, but it can be done. And in some ways you can make it, the best of both worlds, right?
Sure. No, absolutely. Certainly.
Like, there's some really cool D&D core materials coming out and stuff, but it'd be kind of fun to try to run it as a, Pathfinder, or even like, some other, version of maybe not even completely fantasy, and maybe just use it as inspiration.
And that's another one of the benefits in my mind of tabletop gaming, is that you can make all those changes yourself. Like, I talk about it all the time. Like, if you're playing a video game and you've decided, hey, let's all, it's a multiplayer video game, let's all play and change this rule. Generally, you can't, unless you're like really smart and good at making mods, or, but if you're on a PlayStation or an Xbox, you can't really mod very easily that. But a PC game, you can't. And there's all this stuff. Whereas if you're sitting around at a table playing any kind of board game, card game, miniatures, RPG, you can change rules on the fly. And as long as everyone's like, yeah, that sounds cool, it's done. You know what I mean? And
there's no exclusives. Like,
exactly. So, like, just because somebody sat down and wrote and there are so many, specifically in RPGs, there's a lot of people out there writing source material that is designed to be system agnostic,
Mm-hmm.
so that it's not just for, GURPS. It's not just for Pathfinder. It's not just for, D&D. It's
Mm-hmm.
designed to be for whatever, and it will take you a little bit of work. It's not quite as easily plug and play, but you can easily add that kind of stuff into your adventures, But there are other people out there that are like, that I'm sure are like, if it doesn't say Wizards of the Coast on it, I'm not buying it, because I play D&D and everything needs to be D&D. And yeah, this source material seems super cool, but it's not made for this game, even though that wasn't the point. You know what I mean? Yeah. And we see the same thing in board games too.
Mm-hmm. Right. Absolutely. Yeah. There's some that I know I've bought bad games before and spent way more money because I bought it brand new, sight unseen, because I'm like, oh, well, this is the second version of this other game that all my friends had that I really liked, and I never got into that, but here's the new version, and I'm sure it's just as good, if not better, because it's the second version. Right. And then get it and realize it's complete hot garbage, and they did it to make a buck, and I just lost money because I tried to, go along with whatever the brand is, or like buying something just to buy it. Right. I remember when X-Wing was first coming out, I was I was buying just about every ship, whether I liked it or not. There was a couple I'm like, oh, I don't really care for it, but I'm sure that there's a card in there that'll be useful. And I was just buying it just to buy it.
And that was also part of the deal with some of those types of games too, is that there were ships that sometimes you would buy not because you wanted the ship, but because there was a card in there that you could use on different ships that would help synergy in your list building or whatever the deal was. And those are things personally that these days I try to sort of stay away from. Like, I don't want to, I know of at least 3 different ships that I bought for that game because I wanted those cards, because it was going to work well with the stuff that I needed to use. And I've never actually used the ship. There was a ship called an E-Wing, and I remember buying, I think, 2 of them. And I just, it's, you know what I mean? But I never ran it because it was it was a little ugly, frankly, but it was also just not a particularly good ship, but it had a card in it that worked really, really well with, I think, my Millennium Falcons or something like that. You know what I mean? So
yep, that sounds about right. Yep.
Yeah. And that's just not a thing I want to get into as much anymore, but there are other people out there, there are people out there who are still playing HeroClix, where you are still, for the most part, buying a box and you don't know what's in it. There's like 7 models in there, but you don't know, is Superman in there? Is Wonder Woman in there? Like, who's in there? You know what I mean? And
but like D&D's got they've got some of that with their models. Like, they've got the ones that are in like the blister packs or whatever, and you can get those. But then they've got like the Icons of the Realm type thing, and they look like there's some pretty cool models in it. But I'm like, I'm not going to go spend $15 and have no idea what I'm getting.
Right. Yeah. But there are still plenty of people that are, well, there are at least a decent enough amount of people who are interested in doing that, because those, I mean, HeroClix has been around for 20 plus years. Well, maybe not 20 plus, but it's been around for a real good long time. So, it's a situation of trying to figure out, as far as that kind of brand loyalty. In tabletop gaming, we don't see it as much because of the actual physical hooks in, like you were talking about, like the battery chargers or the phone chargers and stuff like that, and the software. But we do see, certainly, there's no reason I couldn't use those HeroClix figures in playing a superhero RPG, so you got that benefit. And I don't think that brand loyalty would cause anybody to be like, no, you can only use these miniatures or whatever. But it does kind of happen. And there are outcomes sometimes because of brand loyalty and the way that things, kind of lay out. Like, I talked before about, Pepsi and Coke and Chevy and Ford and stuff like that. You do get some kind of brand wars in some tabletop gaming. That's one outcome where, due to choice confirmation, again, if you make a choice that's different from mine, then does that mean that I'm wrong? I see people all the time again, going back to miniatures, I see people all the time who are like, oh, Games Workshop doesn't make that? Well, then I'm not buying it, or
or vice versa. All Games Workshop's buying that. No, I'm a Malifaux person, and the Games Workshop is just too commercial for me. So
right, sure. I mean, there's some of that as well, but then there's also and I think that partially the idea is because if other people start to like something else, then maybe I'm wrong about what and my choice. And also very frequently, because tabletop gaming is a social thing, if I see more people going off to play a new game that I don't play, that's fewer people for me to play with. You know what I mean? You need to have another person. You need to have another person to play with. It's not like a video game, like a single player video game. I could just be like, well, I like this game, and so I'm going to sit and play it, and it's fine. But when you're talking about any kind of tabletop gaming, you generally need other people to play with. And so if other people are like, well, we actually like this other thing, and different regions of the country have different sort of like, I've seen this in miniatures a lot. Like there will be a game that you've maybe heard of, but you're like, I don't know anybody who plays it. But there will be some other part of the country where it's crazy popular for some reason. Yeah. And, and we've talked in the past, I think, about like what we've called instigators. Sometimes people like to call them alpha gamers, but it's somebody who's basically like, I really like this game. I think it's cool. I'm going to become an advocate about it, start telling my other gamer friends about it. They'll start telling people about it. We'll eventually get to a point where we've got some critical mass, and then people will come in, someone's new to town. They come into the game store, they moved into town, and they come into the game store. They're like, well, what do people play around here? Oh, well, everybody plays this. Really? Nobody's ever played that where I live. And they're like, well, that's what we play here, right. And so there's nothing wrong with that particularly, but when you start to tell people that their decisions are wrong because they're not deciding to do the same type of game,
or going against stuff because you're like, oh, well, I have to do this because this is their new product, so I'm going to have to do it.
Sure. And the kind of reverse brand loyalty that you've talked about too. Like I know there are people out there that are unhappy with, let's say, I don't know, flying or Fantasy Flight. I've heard people who are like, oh, it's a Fantasy Flight game. I'm not interested in that. And there again, if you're talking about a moral situation, like I haven't bought an EA video game in a very long time because of the way that they've treated their employees and the way that they just a bunch of different stuff. And like, right. And so I'm just not going to help fund that anymore. And that's fine. But if you're just like, well, I play this, so therefore everything else is bad. I don't know, that's not necessarily a great idea. I mean, it also puts into a situation where you start to ignore new games and products from companies like other than the one that you're loyal to. And then you might just be missing out on good stuff. Like there are people out there who are like, oh, I don't like to play that company's games just because they're not indie enough, or they're not this, or maybe they're too indie, or, I see people on both sides of that fence quite frequently, specifically in miniature games. I see people who are like, I don't like to play Games Workshop stuff because I only like to play indie stuff. But there are some really good models, obviously, that they do, and also some good game systems.
Yeah, if you look at like Dungeons & Dragons, like 5th edition, I think had a much slower start because so many people disliked the previous 4 and 4 or 5.
4th edition, sure, yeah.
The 4th edition, they did not care for, and people were like, "Oh, well, yeah, that company is going down. They're just trying to milk it, versus going, oh, they actually listened to people. They made a much better version. This is, So I think a lot of people were late adapters of it because they were so used to being burnt on it that they just assumed that the brand couldn't change or couldn't get better.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that also, like people like, I was saying there are people that won't go with the big companies because they only like indie stuff. And then there's other people that will go only with the big companies because they don't trust indie stuff or they don't want to try indie stuff. And then again, they're also potentially missing out on some really cool games, miniatures, maybe, I don't know, paints, supplies, I don't know, all kinds of different things.
Right.
And that can really also put you into a situation where, again, you're maybe limiting your options more than you ought to, I'm not saying that everyone needs to buy everything, obviously, but, if you're just like out of hand saying, no, I won't because of the company, right? Unless that company did something wrong, or dumb, that's like really like, like there's a company that makes paints and things like that recently came out with, frankly, a really bad product that was really about like, oh, this is how you paint like Auschwitz and like concentration camps and stuff like that. So I'm not buying any more paints from them. Thank you.
Right.
So that's a different story, in my opinion. That's not a brand loyalty thing. That's more of like, voting with your wallet, like I mentioned before. But, I'm a big fan of Pro Acryl paints from Monument Hobbies, but I'm not going to just discount and say, no, I won't use anything else but them. Like that's hurting yourself,
Absolutely.
So,
yeah. You're being too loyal at that point.
Right. Exactly. Absolutely. So I guess the important question to some degree is brand loyalty bad? A lot of times you ask a question like that and you say, well, it depends. I don't think it depends. I think it is bad. I think brand loyalty in general is bad.
Blind brand loyalty. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And again, like I said, if a company's done something immoral or whatever, that's a different story, but it's also not brand loyalty. It's the other way around.
Right. Yeah.
But to just be like, well, this company, I just, everything that they do, I make sure to pick up or, whatever, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. It's a horrible game. I haven't liked anything they've put out for the last 2 years, but I'm going to keep buying it.
And I guess the question to ask at that point is, do you think that the brand will be loyal to you? You know what I mean? Like, when people, I'm always astounded when people are like absolutely like completely focused on, Coke or Pepsi or Ford or Chevy or whatever. The giant corporations don't need a cheering section. You know what I mean? Like they don't, if anything within tabletop gaming, the brand might actually be loyal to you to some degree in that like their customer service might be really good, but you're also talking about like really small companies. Like if you're like, oh man, yeah, exactly. It might be a situation where you're like, I will buy whatever this company makes because I had a problem one time and they fixed it like right away. Like that is actually a brand being loyal to you. And you do see that sometimes because our industry is quite small. You see people who are small independent creators,
and there's a definite line between brand favorability and brand loyalty. Like I got my brother a Christmas gift for a game. It was the new Elf Monopoly. He loves Elf. He's getting married. He doesn't have his own game of Monopoly. Always loved it as a kid. So it just was like the perfect little gift for him. Well, it didn't come with the $100 bills. Don't know why.
There's no $100 bills.
There was no $100 bills in it. And I contacted them, and not only did they, replace it, but they also offered to ship it directly to him, so I didn't have to worry about with COVID how I'm going to get it back to him and everything else. So it was a different address. So I'm more favorable of going, oh, well, they do take care of it, but I'm not going to buy the next Monopoly they produce just because of that.
Yeah, exactly. And you're not going to be like, well, every other board game is garbage because these guys were nice to me once. Like, again, that doesn't make any sense, frankly. If they come out with something new, you'll probably be maybe at least a bit more likely to take a look at it potentially, or be like, oh, okay,
right.
What are they
but
doing?
I'm not going to go take like a Calvin Hobbes sticker with him peeing on an Asthma Day logo and put it in my car.
Put it on the back of your vehicle. Right. Yeah. No, I think that's a good idea. That would be a weird thing to find in general, but still, yeah.
Actually, that would be kind of a funny thing to have, but
I could probably.
The got irony would be
vinyl
there,
cutters. Yeah, I got one of those vinyl cutters. I could do something like that. But I'm not going to. So anyway, my point is that it's a thing where, like, you should support companies, obviously, that will actually have your back somewhat. That totally, especially in a small industry like this, it totally makes sense. But to only believe that just this one company is the only company that can do anything in this particular area, like I won't buy any other miniature or collectible card game except unless it's from Wizards of the Coast. No, yeah, Wizards of the Coast. That's yeah. I get Wizards of the Coast and WizKids mixed up a lot. That's confusing. I wish that one of them would change their name. It would be very helpful to me. But
so like,
they're like, oh, well,
I don't
all
see
right.
we need it.
Do you want some brand loyalty? All right. Yeah, no, and so it's a situation where it doesn't make any sense to me to say, I like to play lots of different games, and I like to have a lot of different experiences and have access to a lot of different materials and things like that. And when you decide that you're going to like completely just out of hand say I'm not going to, even take a look at this new game or even play. Like, I'm not even talking about buying stuff. There are people out there that I've talked to, like specifically in board gaming, where you're going to sit down and one person's going to open the box and you're all going to play their copy of the game. I've seen people who will be like, I'm not going to play, like at a convention, and be like, yeah, I'm not interested in playing that game because it's by such and such company. And you're like, but have you tried it before? No. Have you heard anything about it? Yeah, I've heard good things about it. Like, then, but is it the type of game you like? Well, yeah, it's a worker placement or whatever.
Is there a moral issue? No, I just don't like the company.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, or it's not the company that it's not the company that I like, and so therefore, right. You know what I mean?
Or the opposite, Gaslands, phenomenal game from Osprey. There's people that are like, oh no, we got to play what was the orc racing game from
Speed something,
Speed Looters or something like that.
No, it's Speed Buggies. I don't remember, but yeah, anyway. It came out a little bit after Gaslands, and it's a totally different game other than its vehicles driving around. Those are the only two things.
Right, but I've heard people are oh no, I won't play Gaslands. I'm a Games Workshop guy, so
right.
I wouldn't have bought that game. You're like, okay, I don't. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately make your own choice, but also look at why you're making the choice sometimes, and understand that like, well, maybe this isn't necessarily like, I'm not necessarily doing this for the right reasons. I'm doing this out of some sort of, again, maybe misaligned, brand loyalty to this company that again, like I said, very possibly doesn't have your back, but
right.
I mean, it can stop you from growing as a gamer, I mean, not taking, I don't want to say chances, not taking new experiences, under your wing can
right. You might miss out on some good gaming experiences. Like I know that I stayed out of Legion for a lot longer than I probably should have or would have.
Star Wars Legion?
Yeah. If I had, if it wasn't because I felt that I didn't like the direction that Star Wars X-Wing had gone. And I'm like, yeah, it's the same company, but it's a different game. And why did that really
it's matter? Actually, and that's the thing, is it's sort of the same company. They're both owned by Asmodee, but like Legion is actually developed by a completely different group of people than X-Wing, let's say. It's developed by Atomic Mass Games, something like that. And so, yeah, but they're both Star Wars, and they're both, from the parent company. But and so that's the thing, is that looking at it from that aspect and saying, well, yeah, because I didn't, when, you and I both used to play Star Wars X-Wing, and then when the 2.0 came along, I honestly was like, yeah, I don't feel like buying a bunch of new stuff, so I can keep playing.
That was just like the time for me to pull the pin. It was just kind of like, okay, I'm not devoted enough to want to keep playing, and I don't
Now, that being said, again, going back to my earlier point, I got a friend that we still play 1.0. We still play the old version because why wouldn't we? Like, we're not into the competitive scene. We're not going to tournaments. We get together once in a while and we sit down and we'll play it. And we've still got all our stuff and it all works. They didn't turn off the servers. You know what I mean? Like, so It works out just fine. But if it would have been a situation where we would have been like, oh, well, no, we can't, because of brand loyalty, we wouldn't have had some pretty fun games, honestly. And so, we're not trying to tell you to stop liking what you like, obviously, but again, don't discount something just because it's not, from your brand. My brand. Remember that commercial? The guy with the I think it was a commercial for contacts. He couldn't get the right contacts and it was all dramatic. My brand. Yeah. Anyway. But yeah, so I think it's important to look at that kind of stuff and try to understand, because again, I think it's very interesting why these things crop up, like why brand loyalty happens. And it's frequently out of a place of at least uncertainty, if not almost outright fear, which is weird to have in a board gaming thing. But it's that choice confirmation where you're like, well, like if you get into a game and that's what you play and you identify with it personally, then any other game is the other. It's against you, right? You know what I mean? And to look at it that way, I think is kind of crazy. If other people want to play other games, great. Like, more power to them. That's fine. I'll just keep trying to play the game that I'm kind of playing. But I've talked to friends of mine. I had a friend one time being like, I don't understand why people play anything other than Games Workshop. And it was because he just doesn't want to switch. He never wants to try anything different. He always is just like, we should all just play the same game, and it would just be much easier if everyone did what I said. And I was like, that's not how life works, as it turns out. So, there are in every one of these groups, there are big dogs in each of them, right? You've got obviously Wizards of the Coast is the biggest in card games, collectible card games. I would say Wizards of the Coast is also probably the biggest in RPGs. D&D is probably still the biggest RPG. Yeah. I would say within miniatures, it's obviously Games Workshop. If you're going to go overall big company, probably Asmodee is biggest in board games, but that's just because they've bought a lot of stuff, certainly, which they have over the last 10 years or so. And so there is a big player in pretty much every one of these 4 different genres. And, it's fine if you're interested in saying, yes, I really like stuff from them, but I if you want to keep growing as a gamer, I think not branching out because of brand loyalty is going to be probably stunting a little bit. Not stunting? That would leave you stunted? I'm not sure if I'm saying those words properly. You might just do some stunts. No, I'm sure that's wrong. But you'll end up maybe not having as many fun experiences and growing as a gamer as much as you might like. So yeah.
Which would be bad.
Do you have any brand loyalty?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's I try not to, but I definitely do. I mean, all over the place. Like, Elegoo, if it was like, I might buy their
3D printers. Sure.
Yeah, I might buy their like FDM printer, not because I need one, and not because but because I'm like, oh, I like the brand, But yeah.
But you're not going to be like, oh, I wouldn't buy anything else other than their stuff. There's a reason why brand loyalty, or why brands try to foster some loyalty, is because if they make you happy, then you are more likely to look at their products in the future.
Absolutely. And that's the thing. Like the resin printers, I don't know if I would buy. Like Anycubic is probably their closest competitor. But I like when I was looking, like, the Saturn, before I could get it, I was looking, and they had Anycubic had one that was kind of comparable. It was in stock. It was almost twice the cost, which is probably the only reason why I really didn't actually buy it.
Makes sense, yeah.
There was a part of me going, well, but I know that I like this brand. It had no bearing on whether or not the actual product was going to be different.
But if they were equally priced and equally, available and equally statted out, they had the same, whatever specs, you wouldn't necessarily just automatically out of hand just say no to the other brand, just because.
But
you might be like, I'm slightly more favorable to this company.
Yeah.
Well, but if a friend of you, if a friend of yours bought one, you wouldn't go, oh, that was stupid. You know what I mean? Like that's the brand loyalty that you could do with less of in gaming.
There are some benefits when you have some brand loyalty. And it's only because of similar stuff. Like if you're talking about like paints, even though like some of the colors, you're like, okay, I don't really like these colors, but generally the same paint line will react the same way.
To some degree, they can. Yeah, I mean, you'll have. I mean, I have never had a problem where I've used one paint over another paint, and then because they're from different brands, they like fizzed or there was smoke or there was any kind of negative reaction. I've used if you put
primers
sometimes not so much it's not even the brand issue. The only big issue I've ever had was putting white acrylic ink over a black primer. That worked fine, but then putting contrast paint from Citadel over the acrylic ink, and that's just a chemical issue. That has nothing to do with brands. It's just that the something in the contrast paint will kind of screw up the ink. So that's why if you're going to do that, you add a little bit of matte varnish into the ink, and then that helps to seal the ink better, and then the contrast paint doesn't mess with it. But again, that has nothing to do with brands. It's just like different types of paints. Like I'm sure that there's some sort of primer that could react poorly to, let's say, enamel washes. Like, and so if you get it on there, but then again, that's a chemical thing. But I've never had a situation where I'm like, oh, I used a Vallejo paint and then tried to blend it with a Citadel paint and it didn't work or something like that,
Got it. Because
at least with paint.
Like 3D filaments, usually your settings will usually dictate that some of the brands will work better than others. And it's all different. Like, there's one brand that's actually like a mile from my house at their store, and I didn't know about them until the whole we were doing the 3D printed mask headbands.
The holders in the back.
Yeah. And then I found out about them because they gave us a really good discount to purchase them. And honestly, like, there's part of me that wants to keep buying from them because they're local, but they single-handedly, I ruined like 3 or 4 nozzles and various other pieces of my printer because their stuff just did not work well. It was not coiled properly and was just a bunch of issues. So
sure, and that's just a bad product. Like, there are paints, like, I'll be honest, most Citadel opaque paints, other than a couple of flesh tones, I don't generally use them anymore because they are frequently too thick and a little too almost chalky for me, for the way that I like to paint. But other people love them. So, I mean, it's sometimes it's like if something like destroys your piece of equipment, like messes up a nozzle, or you go out and buy a cheap charger or a different company's charger and you plug it in your phone and it short circuits and bricks your phone. That's not brand loyalty. That's just bad products. But, it's interesting. But I guess my main point about this whole particular episode is that, if you don't like something, then you shouldn't buy it. But I think it's a bad idea, and it just makes the overall gaming community a bit more toxic when you start to have these battles about, like, well, you shouldn't buy this game because you should buy this game, or you shouldn't buy stuff from this company, you should buy stuff from this company. And then when they say, well, why shouldn't I? Well, just because I think that's a good, not so much like this company does something wrong or is mean to its employees or anything like that. It's just like, well, just because it's better, that's better is kind of in a lot of situations can be kind of a subjective term. You know what I mean? So,
right. Unless it's, GameFor, then it's better.
Exactly. Then it's objectively better. Thanks again for listening to this episode of the GameFor Podcast. If you've got questions or comments and you're watching on YouTube, please leave a comment below. If you're listening via your favorite podcast player or just aren't into the whole YouTube comment section thing, then you can feel free to reach out to us via email at podcast@iamgamefor.com. You can also keep up to date with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And check out our website at www.iamgamefor.com. That is www.iamgamefor.com. Thanks.